Hello, everybody. Welcome to our next session. I'd like to thank, of course, Marissa Stevens, Professor Shigon, and Professor Rollinger for organizing this and inviting me to chair one of the panels. And I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming everybody into Egypt firmly now, crossing over the Pelusiac branch, taking you all into Egypt and focusing on that part of the Achaemenid Empire. And in that regard, our first speaker today in the Imperial Diaspora in Egypt session is Elena Malik. Elena Malik studied Egyptology, ethnology, and Near Eastern Studies at Rupert Karls University in Heidelberg from 2013 to 2018. Thereafter, she worked as a research assistant in the project of Egyptian loanwords in ancient Oriental languages, funded by the Fritz Tyson Foundation. In this context, she developed her PhD thesis, which she completed in 2021. She is currently a member of the Department of Egyptology at the University of Leipzig. And today she will be speaking on royal ideology and imperialism in hieroglyphic and cuneiform inscriptions in Achaemenid Egypt. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Malik.
Thank you, dear ladies and gentlemen. I'm very sorry being able to join the workshop in present, but it's still a pleasure for me to present you my lecture about royal ideology and imperialism in hieroglyphic and cuneiform inscriptions from Achaemenid Egypt. And I have to say thank you once again to the organizers for their kind invitation. In my lecture, I will deal with the royal legitimacy and ideology of the first Persian rule in Egypt and illustrate how Egyptian and Persian conceptions caused and influenced each other. In addition, it will be examined to what extent imperialistic ideas are revealed. The focus here is on the written legacies in Egypt, but iconographic representations are also taken into account. My lecture will be divided into the following parts: an introduction to the circumstances of the Persian rule in Egypt, the representation of Cambyses II after the conquest of Egypt, and the sources from the reign of Darius I, on which I will focus my lecture. A distinction should be made here between the representations in Egyptian temples and the representation on other monuments, as the candlesticks in the Darius statue found in Susa. Finally, I will draw a short conclusion. At the end of the first half of the first millennium BC, from 526 onwards, Psammetichs III reigned in Egypt. Here we can see one of the very rare images of this Egyptian king. His rule was lasting only for a half year, and it was ended by Cambyses II, who conquered Egypt in 526 or 525 BC. This was not the first time Egypt has been conquered and ruled from foreign powers. Instead, it has been the fourth time in 1 millennium. The others are the rules of Libyan, Kashites, and 2 times the Assyrian kings, but they only ruled short and not over the whole land of Egypt. But aside from the Assyrian rule, which only lasts for a short time of weeks or months, it was the first time the ruler of Egypt didn't reside in the country. Instead, the country became now a part of the Persian satrap system without any special meaning for the Persian great king, which could be seen as a way of culture shock for the ancient Egyptians. Nevertheless, Cambyses II started already to present himself as the legal pharaoh. Therefore, he engaged the Egyptian official Ochahoresnet to create a royal titulary and declare himself as pharaoh. In this way, he tried to legitimize himself as the Egyptian ruler, whereby his identity as a Persian great king remains unmentioned. Also, he shows himself as the Egyptian king in various monuments, for example, in a stele from Saqqara in northern Egypt. Here we see Cambyses as a pharaoh kneeling in front of the Apis bull. The monument is in a bad state of preservation, so it's difficult to realize details. But we can see the stele is clearly in Egyptian tradition. At the top there is the royal titulary. Cambyses is called by his Horus name Semertaui, unifier of both lands, which is very interesting because it is an allusion to the unification of Egypt, which he consequently claims for himself. Also, his throne name, Mestu Ra, which means image of Ra, is used. It has to be said that Egyptian kings do have traditionally 5 names. Here we can see the other names of Cambyses. As it can be seen, only 3 different names come down to us, which is possibly due to this lost situation. In monumental inscriptions of the late period, usually used is the throne name, sometimes the hero's name, while in documentary text in opposition, the so-called birth name was used, which was in this case Cambridge, the Egyptian transcription of the Persian Kambuchia. In contrast, the 2 missing names, the golden hero's name and the Nepti name, are very rarely used. As a part of his royal titulary, Cambyses is also called Necha Nefer Nepta Ui, which can be translated as beautiful God, Lord of the Two Lands. Very typical are the used epithets. The first epithet was used already in the 3rd millennium during the Old Kingdom, among others for the designation of deities. It must be emphasized here that the pharaoh did not represent a full-fledged deity in ancient Egypt, but was assigned to the divine sphere. The title Lord of the Two Lands is also attested since the Old Kingdom. The 2 epithets Necha Nefer, Nepta Ui become standard in royal titular during the New Kingdom. In summary, this is an example of a representation of Cambyses II as Egyptian pharaoh in traditional Egyptian form. From the reign of Darius I, significantly more textual and iconographic representations have been preserved. The inscriptions and depictions on temple walls can be cited as an important source here. Of particular interest and importance is the decoration of the Temple of Hybris. The temple is located in the oasis of Chaga, located in the western desert, being the southernmost oasis. The Egyptian name Hebet means city of the plough and refers to the settlement existing at least since the late period. The temple was likely built during the 26th dynasty, while most of the decoration first occurred during the reign of Darius I. However, much of the temple that exists today is an extension from the 30th dynasty and the Ptolemaic period. Here is a plan of the temple. The black part is the core building, while the later extensions are highlighted in gray. Very important decorations from the time of Darius could be found in all areas of the temple. Only the cryptas remained without any decoration. My focus will be on the so-called Room M, the original entrance area of the temple. Here I would like to pick out some motifs instead of dealing with the whole decoration program. On the other door gems, the ruler's entrance into the temple is depicted, as its tradition, but it is unusual that he is standing on a Semeter Uri sign, paralleling here the legitimation of rulership by Cambyses, whose hero's name was, after all, Semeter Uri. It seems likely that it should be emphasized that Darius, as the legal Egyptian ruler, makes the union of the Egyptian country first enabled. On the opposite tableaus of the door, there are 2 very interesting motifs revealed. Darius is depicted as Horus-Falcon, receiving the Ansh symbol from the god Month and Amun. This scenery is very uncommon since normally the human-shaped ruler receives the life symbol from a god. So this is a deification of the ruler, which was not usual in this form in Egypt. The choice of the god Horus is hardly surprising because Horus has been the Egyptian king god par excellence since the early dynastic period. Darius is also depicted in the form of a falcon elsewhere, in the 2nd register on the right temple facade of the Pro-Naos. Here an extraordinary figure of the god is encountered. We can see a god in the shape of a falcon with wings, wearing a double crown and sparing the serpent Apophis. In the section to this scene, however, the depicted deity is identified as Seth, who is great in strength. In general, the 2 gods Seth and Horus are closely related as uncle and nephew, with the god Seth having been associated with the desert and foreign countries, especially since the New Kingdom. After the New Kingdom, a proscription of the god began, making him a symbol of foreign evil powers, which is why his depiction on a temple wall represents a break with tradition. The motif of the lion running through the legs and the fact that the lens with which a pelvis is appeared has the head of a hedging mace at the top indicates that the scene is the slaying of enemies, a very common scene in Egyptian temple wars, performed by the king. For comparison, we see this motif in the so-called Nama palette from the early dynastic period, where the pharaohs slice the foreign enemies of Egypt. As a result, research established the view that the depiction in the Ibis temple is a representation of the pharaoh. Since Darius is nowhere mentioned by name at this point, the kingship could be understood here as some sort of an abstract. Accordingly, the pharaoh is the foreigner coming from Persia, defeats here the enemy of the gods of pelvis, who threatens the Maat and thereby the existence of Egypt. In addition, a tendency towards the deification of the ruler, which is so intangible in Egyptian tradition, is once again evident here, whereby the entire scene, which is usually located in the inner world, is elevated to a transcendental level. Consequently, this scene is a further development of Egyptian religious ideas tailored to Persian rule, rather than a mere reception of old traditions. Thus, in the Temple of Ibis, Egyptian traditions are mixed with Achaemenid neologisms and further developments, which, however, are rooted in Egyptian religion. Specific Persian motifs and ideas, however, did not find their way into the temple decoration. Now we come to the representation of Darius I and other monuments, and therefore to one of the group of monuments dealing with the construction of a canal. This canal, as you can see here, runs along the Timsah Lake through the Wadi Atumilat and serves to connect the Red Sea with the Nile, thus facilitating shipping traffic. Therefore, the canal, comparable to today's Suez Canal, was a waterway between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. The convolute consists on the one hand of 4 stelae and on the other hand of a statue of Darius I made in Egypt, which was found in Susa. The fragments of one of these 4 stelae specimens, namely the Serapeum stele, were unfortunately already lost in the 19th century, which is why today only 3 steles are remaining. A special feature of the stele in the statue from Susa is the coexistence of Egyptian and Persian elements. 2 of the existing stelae have one side with hieroglyphic inscriptions and another with a cuneiform reliquary. It has to be emphasized at this point that I cannot deal here with all the inscriptions present on these monuments, but would like to give a few selected examples. These are the hieroglyphic versions of the steles. They are consisting of a narrative part, the main text, which is dealing with the digging of the canal, which will only play a subordinate role here. More interesting are the motifs and inscriptions in the pediment fields of the steles, which is best preserved in the Maskuta stele. There could be seen a well-known Egyptian ritual called the unification of the 2 lands, which is executed by gods of the Nile. That ritual has been documented in Egypt since the early period and originally alludes to the unification of the empire, but has been reinterpreted throughout history. The pharaoh or his gods tied the symbols of the whole land on both sides of his throne to represent domination, control, and gaining power all over parts of Egypt. Besides the gods, there are short inscriptions, and in the middle of the scene, there's a cartouche with the name Darius, so that it becomes clear that he is the one who's unifying the country. The same motif could also be found at the pedestal of the statuary of Darius. There's also a short inscription which is similar but not identical with the inscription of the steles. Words to speak. I have given you life, all dominion, all permanence, all health, and all joy. Words to speak. I have given you all lands and all foreign countries, and that they are united under your standards. I have given you Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, an adoration of your perfect face like Ra forever. These inscriptions are the direct speech of the god of the Nile, granting Darius legitimacy as ruler. The claim to rule over the foreigners lying at the feet of the pharaoh represents a stereotype of Egyptian royal inscriptions, and therefore shows no decided reference to the empire ruled by Darius. Another common feature of the steles in the statuary are the so-called toponym lists, which bears 24 different toponyms. Such lists are known from Egypt from the 2nd millennium onwards. The respective arrangement was not determined arbitrarily, instead a systematic order behind it emerges. On the left side, localities that are located north and east of the Persian heartland are listed, while on the right side, the places located in the south and west from this perspective are named. However, this separation has not been consistently observed and shows a few shifts. Presumably, this is due to space considerations, as the number of Persian satrapies in the east predominates. On both the stele and the statue, the names have been inscribed in cartouches imitating a fortress, in keeping with the Egyptian tradition. On each of the cartouches, there's an image of an inhabitant of the subjugated locality, who has raised in his arms in a kneeling position, bracing or supporting. This shows a change in the depiction convention compared to the other list of toponyms known from Egypt, where the defeated enemies were depicted with their arms tied behind their backs. This change can be explained by the divergent political situation of the Achaemenid Empire compared to the pharaonic state. The places mentioned are not enemy territory, but provinces of the empire, which were under the control of the Persian king. The inhabitants of these provinces, Persia itself is also mentioned here, are by no means seen as a threat to defend it against, but rather as subjects, which is why the change of motive can be seen as indispensable. Iconographically, the different persons are distinguished by various characteristics that can be associated with their region. What is striking here is that Egypt itself also appears in the list, which is not normally the case. The term Kemet was used here and thus the Egyptian proper designation. It is also striking that the determinative of place was used instead of the determinative of foreign country. Since Egypt was otherwise listed as one toponym among many, it can be assumed that the craftsman simply used the usual spelling, that it was not the explicit construction of the royal client. In the following, I would like to return to two of the stele, namely the Caprit and the Suez stele, both of which are in a rather fragmented state. Here the first 4 lines of the narrative part are of particular interest. The text is best preserved in the Caprit stele, which I use here predominantly, although additions can also be made on the basis of the stele of Suez. Here is the text of the first line. It could be translated as, the god who caused to come into being in heaven, man who caused the coming into being of wood. Based on parallels, it can be concluded that that passage refers to the Persian god Ahura Mazda. Possibly the name of Ahura Mazda was not mentioned because of the religious sensitivities of the Egyptian population. Nevertheless, the text here seems to be in Persian tradition. However, this already changed in the next line, in which, as can be seen, the traditional Egyptian royal titular was used. Darius, may he live forever. The pharaoh, may he live, be high and healthy forever. In the next 2 lines, it is written, the great of the great, the boundaries, the son of the godfather Hystaspes, the Achaemenid the Great. The title Great of the Great was in use in Egypt, but not as a part of the royal titular, which is right could be an adaptation of the Persian King of Kings. Also, the genealogical indication of origin does not correspond to the contemporary Egyptian form. Instead, it was customary in Egyptian royal inscriptions to emphasize the divine descent of the ruler by referring to him as the son of a god. Thus, this is also a decidedly Persian characteristic. Therefore, Egyptian and Persian elements of legitimation of rulership entered into a symbiosis in this text section. There are some direct parallels for this passage in the cuneiform inscriptions on the canal monuments, what I would like to show hereafter. Here we see the cuneiform version of the stele of Khepret. The inscription on the main field of the stele, which were written in ancient Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian, could be translated as following. A great God is Ahura Mazda, who created that heaven, who created this earth, who created man, who created happiness for man, who made Darius king, who gave to Darius the kingdom that is great, that is rich in steeds and rich in heroes. Darius the great king, king of kings, king of lands, king on this great earth, son of Hystaspes the Achaemenid. It announces Darius the king. I am Persian, from Persia I have conquered Egypt. I have ordered this canal to be dug from Pirara. This is the name of the river that flows through Egypt to the sea that comes from Persia. After this canal was dug, as I had ordered, ships went from Egypt to Persia through this canal, as was my wish. In contrast to the hieroglyphic inscriptions, the Persian god Ahura Mazda is also mentioned by name here. Moreover, Darius attributes the legitimation of his rule here to the Persian Empire god, whereas an Egyptian influence is not tangible in the wording. Instead, Darius presents himself here as a Persian king, whereas his function as a legitimate Egyptian pharaoh does not seem to play a role here. On the other hand, his identity as a Persian and his function as a conqueror of Egypt is emphasized, with which the inscriptions diametrically oppose the message of the hieroglyphic texts. The picture program of the stele is of a different nature, in which the use of a cartouche crowned with an ostrich feather is particularly noteworthy, whereby it is clearly an Egyptian element. The cartouche is framed by two male figures in Persian customs holding out their arms to each other. The right figure is here strongly affected by destructions, whereby it is, however, with all probability the reflection of the left figure. Possibly the depiction of two entities is intended to create a parallel to the hieroglyphic side of the stele. The headgear of the better preserved left figure is to be identified as a stepped crenellation crown, and thus as an insignia of the rule by Darius. Clearly Egyptian are again the vast scepters attached to the side in the representation of the sky, which is reminiscent of the corresponding Egyptian hieroglyph. The winged sun, which already moved from Egypt to the Orient in the early 2nd millennium, can be categorized as not clearly assignable to one of the two cultural areas. Therefore, the pictorial program ties in with Egyptian as well as Persian traditions and can be viewed from different angles. In addition to the pictorial representation, there is a short inscription in the pediment, which was again written in 3 languages. The text in the ancient Persian version reads as follows. Darius, the great king, king of kings, king of lands, king on this great earth, son of Hystaspes, the Achaemenid. In this way, the text is once again completely in the Persian tradition, whereas the pictorial program is also linked to Egyptian royal ideologies and religious ideas. This discrepancy can be explained by the fact that it could presumably be assumed that even the educated Egyptian observer simply could not read the cuneiform text, and hence there was hardly any danger of snubbing the population, which is why it was no problem to boast about the conquest of the country. The cuneiform inscriptions were thus addressed to a Persian audience, while the hieroglyphic inscriptions were addressed to the Egyptian population. After Darius, 4 other Persian kings ruled Egypt, but these left 3 written traces phrases, which is why hardly anything can be said about their occurrence in Egypt. In the following, I would like to summarize in which way the Persian rule over Egypt was legitimized and to what extent our specifically Achaemenid imperialism is reflected in it. The Persian kings, especially the two kings Cambyses II and Darius I, attempted to present themselves as legitimate rulers in Egypt. This was done in particular through the use of traditional epithets and phrases, as well as traditional iconography, through which the rulers presented themselves as pharaohs. In addition, the linkage to religious ideas and practices associated with the Egyptian royal ideology can be demonstrated. In addition to a mere reception, however, there were also adaptations to the new political situation and, at least on the canal monuments, borrowings from the Persian cultural area. A contrast to this is the wording of the cuneiform inscriptions from Egypt. Here the rulers present themselves as broad conquerors of the country. In doing so, they emphasize their identity as Persians and great kings, implicitly revealing imperialist ideas that should probably remain hidden from the Egyptian observer of the Achaemenid monuments. Accordingly, the ruling ideology of the Persian kings in Egypt exhibits two different levels that do not harmonize with each other. Thank you for your attention.